All right, so we're here to take a look at query and protocol, right? We're going to couple that also with the proactive alerting capability within Timeline. So queries and protocols are really second level type of analytical tools. So we think about the typical Timeline project. It starts with loading data, gathering data from source systems, loading that data into Timeline, doing your initial process discovery phase, where you're looking at things like the process schema, all the different paths and variants, the bottleneck analysis, tools like that, where I don't really need to be asking anything too utterly specific about my data and my workflow, but I'm gathering insights that way. Whereas with queries and protocols, now we've got that initial base understanding of what our process looks like. And we want to ask more specific, more detailed, very scenario-based type of questions about the data that we have. Okay, and so with query, we're able to build out those sequences, right? A condition with all the different logic, which we'll touch on, to be able to ask whether or not it's kind of a hypothesis check. I have a hypothesis, I have a thought, or maybe I've heard something might be happening, and I want to go and run it to ground. I want to check that it is or it is not occurring. Now with protocol analysis, and these two kind of analytical, I guess, tools are coupled because they're both asking questions just in the inverse way. So with process query, we build that condition, it goes off and finds us the cases that match, if there are any cases that match the condition we created. With protocol, we build in our expectations, our process rules, our SLAs, compliance rules, things like that. And then we don't necessarily want to see those that match or follow that expectation. We wouldn't be concerned about those. We want to see the inverse. We want to see those that violate, that don't meet the expectation, that breach an SLA or a compliance rule. And so you can think of doing that analysis within Timeline as being a retrospective. Okay, we're looking at the data that we've already captured, and we're understanding whether or not these conditions are being met or not. Being more proactive and preventative, we would couple that with alerting, such that as we're consistently loading data into our Timeline project, we're going to, every time we refresh our data, we're going to check against the process rules we've defined, and we're going to notify the appropriate users if something were to not be up to snuff, and so they can step in prior to there being a negative outcome, right? Or pushing along a case that's coming up against an SLA threshold. Okay, with that, I'm going to reshare out Timeline itself, and we'll take a look at an example of first query and then protocol. All right, so the use case that I'm going to be using here for the example is going to be the emergency department use case. So we're tracking patient life cycles throughout their stay in a hospital emergency room. So just to give you a view of what that high level schema looks like, right? Patients come in, they get triaged, they are roomed, and hopefully then dismissed from the emergency department. But what we're going to do is we're going to ask a very specific question here and query about this workflow. And so let's just I'll verbalize it as I build it out in the UI. So what I'm curious about, and what I'm going to do is select the different events that I want to include in my logic. Let's do patient arrived in the ED, followed by maybe they had a lab test was ordered. Okay. Then we would expect after a lab test, we would get a lab result. And then I only want to see patients who are in turn admitted into the hospital, right? Because they could certainly be discharged out, but I really only want to see the patients that were admitted into the hospital after their ED stay in this scenario. So this is a relatively straightforward sequence, right? I'm not concerned with any events that are happening in between these. I'm concerned or curious about just the ones that you see on screen. Now there's tons more logic that we can input here to be more specific. As I mentioned, we're asking a very specific question. So let's ask a more detailed, maybe more interesting type of question. So we're going to leave this alone for now, but we're going to say, maybe that patient got a lab result, but there was actually no instance of a lab order ever occurring. right? So this did not happen. And actually, to be more specific, let's say I'm really only curious about when the patient arrived, but on the day of the week, and I'm able to use my attributes here, okay? So I can be specific about a day of the week. Let's just say it contains sun. So it's Sunday. So a person came in on a Sunday, no record of a lab being ordered. We've got not only one lab result, but let's actually add something to that and say, I could explain one lab result without an order. Maybe it's a quick glucose test to triage, something like that. But if I get two lab results without an order, that's an issue. I really would want to know about that. And then let's say between that second lab result and between the patient being admitted, it took longer than 30 minutes for that to occur. So now we're inputting time logic around how long it's taken to complete one or more steps of this query. You can also be very specific or more stringent around. At first, I said other things can happen in between here. I'm not concerned, but I can make it less flexible in that, no, this needs to happen before this, before this, before this. Right? But in this case, I don't necessarily, I'm not so concerned with that. I just want to see how has this ever happened? I don't believe that it should be able to happen, but I'm curious and I want to quickly run a search. Now, the beauty of this, as you will have seen if you've used query, is the sub-second response time here, which is pretty nice. I click search and it goes off, introspects all the data and says, yes, you do have that very specific scenario occurring. Here are the 42 cases where that specific pattern has occurred. So again, as we think about utilizing query, this is almost a different way of thinking analytically because folks could not ask questions like this historically with other data visualization tools. There's no way to input sequencing and patterns and things happening or not with repetition and time. Okay, so when you think about working with business users or analysts, it's about really showing them the capability and trying to understand if they have questions that this could answer for them that they haven't been able to get in some other way. Okay. So that's the query mechanism. Like I said, that's the search tool. Build the logic, go find out those cases that match the logic that I've created. Now, on the flip side, you have protocols. And what's interesting about protocols is that you're not building an end-to-end process workflow here because there's not going to be one or probably even 10 or 20 ways that the process could be executed. What protocols are designed for are around specific scenarios, specific branches of the process, if you will. All right. So every process has certain parts of it. When they get to this, when I get to stage 7, step 8, 9, and 10 have to be done in order within a given time frame. And we have a rule around that. And I'd want to build an expectation or a protocol around that very specific sequence, right? But maybe steps 1 through 6 can flow and happen out of order. There's not as much rigidity around that. So what we do is we build a series of protocols, not just one, but you can build a whole library of these protocols around all the different conditions and scenarios that you might have within your process. And so this happens to be a hospital admittance protocol. So again, not every patient is going to be admitted into the hospital. A lot of them, I would say the majority, would be discharged after their ED stay. However, when we hit this step, we make a decision to admit, we need to make sure that patient gets transferred, is out of the ED within 1 hour, and then finally is admitted into the hospital. Okay, so you see you have sequencing again, you have time, you can build flexibility in here because what we don't want to get is false positives with these protocol violations, because what we're going to do is we're going to click show violations. Here are all the ways that this protocol was not followed, right? So it's very specific. It's not just telling you, hey, you had a problem. It's saying something happened out of order. This happened the wrong amount of times. It was missed altogether. You had a time violation. So each one of these violations is not created equal. You can hide them if interested. But the idea here is I can, again, retroactively take a look. Here, the 14% of the cases had the patient departed happening out of order. I can drill in using this apply filter to just look at the specific cases that exhibited that behavior. Okay, drill in very specifically. But as I said, you can build flexibility in here so that maybe you don't get that full list of violations. There are certain things there that you don't necessarily want to see. I can allow things to run concurrently, allow them to be repeated or float if they don't have to go in a specific order. And that's going to pare down this list of violations you get to a more impactful view. Okay. Now, tying these both together, as I mentioned, is the alerting mechanism, right? So it's nice to be able to go in here and see historically how we fared, but wouldn't it be even better to just build this logic and then be notified upstream before we hit some blocker or come up against an SLA threshold or compliance issue? I build my logic and then I allow it to notify either humans, okay, via text message or email, or we can notify or send web messages, webhooks to third-party downstream software. So where this comes in and is key, and we've had some customers using this, and it's extremely powerful, is automating remediation steps. So if we know that there's some automated workflow that we can trigger to begin pushing the issue remediation forward of this alert that we've created, we can call an RPA, digital worker or robot. We can spawn a BPM process. Maybe we want to spin up a trouble ticket in a system. And before a human even has to become engaged, we can have the technology working in a closed loop fashion begin to start to remediate that problem, right? And so any tool that can receive a web service call can receive a call from Timeline. So we're ingesting, we're identifying the issue, and we're automatically triggering remediation prior to a human ever having to step in and make a change. Okay, so I'll pause here and let's see if there are any questions on anything I've gone over. I can look in the Q&A, or Peter, I don't know if you want to speak up. Or
yeah, just a few seconds if we'll find questions in Q&A section. Yeah, and we have first one. Can you see it, Alex? In the
yeah, I got it now. I got it. I just had to bring it up on my side. All right. How are queries and protocols used together? Are they? Yes, absolutely. So as you saw, and it kind of goes back to what type of scenario are you running? I would say queries are more of a search tool. Like, I'm just kind of curious, are these things occurring? But really what you can see is a lot of the logic is the same between query and protocol. It's really about what you're interested in learning or the end goal. So for queries, it's kind of a hypothesis check. I got an idea about a scenario or a pattern. I want to go check and see if cases have met that. Versus in protocol, I don't want to have an idea about that, right? I know there are certain sequences that must be followed. These are our best practices, our rules. And so I need to know when they are not met. And so those can tie in with alerting that way. So from a conditional and logic perspective, they're pretty similar, but really it depends, I guess, kind of what stage of your analysis you're in. Okay, another one, hidden protocol violations. Okay, so I mentioned that, but I didn't show it. So really the idea here behind hiding violations is to say, I want to just make this list as specific and impactful and useful to me in my analysis as possible. So the second or third part of the question is it change alerting? It does not. And I can actually show you how we would build an alert based off of a protocol. But really, it's just hiding them in order to make this list really represent the violations that I care about. What are the ones that matter to me? Because like I said, maybe something happening or missing, not occurring, that doesn't matter to me. I'm not concerned with that. So I just hide it. And here's the list that I'm really interested in taking a look at. And then I guess the next step would be, okay, if I want to turn this into an alert, I can then apply the filter, okay, save this filter as a set, right? And that's a named set of data that we would have. And then what you'll see in your alerting tool is that it allows you to base your alert off of a set. So once you've saved that protocol violation as a set, you can come in there and define that as your alert logic. Can a query be transferred magically to a protocol? That would be magical. But no, not at this point. I think what you'll see is this isn't happening even in the next release of Timeline, which is scheduled to come out next week, version 6.0. We are looking at ways to consolidate the two, because they are so similar in logic, and they are just kind of the inverse. It's kind of two different sides of the same coin, if you will. So there may be some changes as to how you how you build protocols and queries in the UI, but that would be in a future release. But for now, you would need to create them both separately. One more. How detailed is an alert violation email? What info does it show? So alerts will by default give you obviously a message, and they'll provide a link to Timeline. And what will happen is it's not just going to give you a generic link into Timeline and give you kind of the full view of all the data. What'll happen is it'll automatically create a subset of overall cases that have exhibited. So if it's one timeline that exhibited the alert behavioral violation, if you will, you will come in and you'll be automatically filtered down to that single case. So you can immediately go in and inspect further that specific case. If it's 50, it's going to be 50. So that alert will give you kind of the pertinent information for the violators of the alert logic, so that you can kind of easily go and investigate those cases further. Can anyone be emailed with an alert, even those without a timeline account? Yes, certainly. You can receive the alert email even if you don't have a timeline account. That would make it, I think, a little bit more difficult to come in there and further investigate the cases. But I do also believe you can add more details in the alert message. For example, this include references to timelines. So you could list, for example, timeline IDs as well as attributional data. So for example, if you do have somebody that's not a timeline user but wanted to receive the alert, they could get it with case ID information in case they were going to go to another system to investigate, and then also attributional data fields. So, I can include the doctor in this scenario, or the means of arrival, right? That pertinent information, which could give context clues for where to go investigate, how to go investigate. So I think I just answered the next one without a link. What can they see? You can add data to the alert message. Simulations, can you have two graphs of the before and after? Yeah, I don't know how that really necessarily relates to what we just kind of discussed. There's going to be a new simulation tool, which is coming out in Timeline 6.0. And that'll allow you to compare based on simulated or changes in certain variables around your process, things like branching and throughput time and resource availability. And so that will give you the ability to compare a before and after, but that doesn't necessarily relate to. So Ignacio, if you want to write in with more detail about your question, happy to answer that if I didn't. Protocol count violation. Let me go back to my protocol. What is a protocol count violation? Okay, so this relates to something happening the wrong amount of times. So like I said, if in our base definition, we assume everything is only going to happen one time unless I allow it to repeat. And then it can repeat up to 5 times, for example, and then I won't see an alert based off of that. So we have the wrong count. This happened maybe 2 or 3 or 4, however many times it repeated. And so what that's telling me is this basically repeated when I didn't give it the ability to repeat. So that's why it's showing you that that is a violation. Okay. I guess I can give it one more minute, see if there's any other questions. But if not, I think Elena, I can send it back to you. We can close it out.
Yeah, let's wait like for a minute. If we don't have other questions, and you are done with your topic for today, then I guess we'll be able to wrap up earlier. So guys, you have Alex for the whole like 7 minutes to ask him anything you want to know about timeline and anything that was not completely clear in the training material. So please use your chance. Yeah, we have another one.
Can queries be used with alerts or just protocols? No, absolutely. Queries can also be used with alerts. Right. So I can actually save my queries. So I can do that, use the query as in my alert. I can also use kind of, for example, like a query with other filters and save that as a set. Right. So just a query is a part of multiple filters. So if I set my query and then I say, I only want to see those that had this specific, right? And then I can create this as a set. So it can be kind of, nested within a larger set, or you can use queries on their own as alerting logic. And so what it does is, as I mentioned, every time we load new data, right? So here's a query, here's all my saved queries. Every time we load new data, we're going to check if it meets the condition in the query, then we're going to notify via alert. Any common mistakes that are made when using the monitoring capacities of timeline? I think if it would maybe just making my logic too general. So the one thing we don't want to do is inundate people with messages, right? And we probably get alerts out of many different systems that we use. And so my kind of recommendation would be when you're building these queries, these protocols, and in turn the alerts, make sure it's very specific to the scenario that you want to be notified on. If it's a very specific dimension or attribute, make sure that's included in the logic that you're using for your alert. Right? Otherwise, folks are going to start getting these messages, these alerts, and eventually they're just going to ignore them, and they're not going to be impactful or useful because they're going to receive, notifications when they really don't care about the actual violation. So that would be my recommendation: is make sure that the messages that you're sending are useful and have impact for the person that's receiving them.
Thank you very much. That's all for today. Have a nice day.